We have one item tonight with the HR committee. The HR committee, though, finds itself in a unique situation tonight because both the chair and the vice chair are out sick this evening. So based on directive from the legal office, at this point, I will turn it over to the clerk, and she will need to accept nominations from the HR committee members to appoint a temporary chair to run their portion of this joint meeting.
Okay, do I have a nomination for temporary chair for tonight for the HR committee?
I'll nominate Alder Herbst.
Boy, that came quickly.
Are there any other nominations? If there are no other nominations, then you can just accept it as unanimous vote. And Dawn, you're on.
You can, wherever you're comfortable. Just call your section of the meeting to order, and then we'll start here.
I'm going to say good evening. It's 5:30, September 27th, and I'm calling this HR meeting to order. We have a quorum present.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Our one joint item tonight is relevant to employee benefit plans. Discussion and possible action approving the 2023 health, dental, vision, and supplemental insurance plan. And we do have our acting HR director, Ann Keenan, with us if you have questions about the materials that were provided in the packets. It looks like this year we are under on the health insurance side at least, a fixed rate arrangement that was made a year prior, which is resulting in some savings. I don't know, Ann, if you wanted to just walk us through the various plans before we work on them?
Right now, we have two plans. We have a Premier plan, which encompasses Aspirus, Marshfield Clinic, Ascension, Prevera, UW Health, Mayo Clinic, which is obviously called a Premier for a reason because it encompasses more plan, more options. And then we also have our Simply One option, which is Marshfield Clinic only. As you can see, everything has pretty much changed, stayed the same. Our deductibles have stayed the same for family and health. Our out-of-pockets have stayed the same. Our co-insurances have stayed the same. What the difference is, obviously, is the employer and the employee rate. Basically, the 9.5% is what we had negotiated as a max for last year when we signed our 2-year contract. So if we would have gone to market and not had that protection of the 9.5, we would be looking at anywhere from a 12 to a 15% increase going out to market because of our usage for 2022. So I did some notes and numbers. So for the difference for employee this year versus last year for the Premier employee cost, a single is $8.02 a month. And for the family cost, it's going to be $24.72 per month. For the Simply One employee costs for single will be an additional $6.40 a month. And for the family, Simply One will be $19.70 per month. We did look at other options, but we did think this was the best option for the employees of the city at this point in time.
Okay, and you noted no additional increases to the other three plans, right? The dental, the vision, and the supplement?
That is correct.
Okay, Sarah, a question?
So on the Premier, it says no vision benefit. Is there additional outside vision benefit then?
Yes, there is. And actually, both Premier and Simply One do offer one free exam, but you have to be in network.
Okay. Additional questions from finance at all? Okay.
Do we need a motion to accept this?
We both will have to take one, yes. So if you want to go first, you can.
I'm looking for a motion to accept the health and benefit plans for the city employees. Motion made by Alder Killian. I need a second. Second by Gisselman. Thank you very much. Oh, I vote aye too. I'm not well.
It's okay. I'll let you guys go ahead and vote, and then we'll take the same motion.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
I myself, motion has passed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do we have the same motion from Finance to accept the employee benefit plans for next year? Motion by Denny, is there a second? Second by Lukens. Further discussion? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? None are opposed, so that item from Finance carries as well. That is the only joint item, so we'll give time for the HR committee to adjourn.
I'd like a motion to adjourn. Oh, motion made by Alder Gilselman, second by Killian. All in favor?
Aye.
I myself. Meeting is adjourned.
Okay, thank you for that. Then Finance will continue in session with the remaining 8 items, or 9 items on the agenda. The first item on our agenda for tonight is the minutes of our previous meeting from 9/13 of '22, copies of which are in the packet. Any revisions or adjustments to the minutes necessary? If not, I'll take a motion to approve them. Motion by Watson, is there a second? Second by Lukens. Members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None are opposed. The minutes are approved. Item number 3 is our 2021 audit presentation, and we have our representatives from Clifton, Larson, and Allen with us this evening to go over the results of the audit. You should have received in your council mail a copy of the audit. It's a spiral-bound white booklet, but they'll walk us through the finer points of the audit. Welcome.
Thank you. Again, I will just do a quick introduction, and then I'll step out of the way and let Stuart Randall go through the financial statements, and then I'll pop back in at the end and just let you know about some things coming up, some GASBs coming up for next year, and then take questions. So with that, my name's John Troutman, principal for CLA, your audit firm. This is Stuart Randall. He'll be going through the financial statements today. So again, any questions, either interrupt us throughout the process, throughout the presentation, or at the end. You can certainly ask anything you want. So with that, here's Stuart.
Good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. It's kind of that weird time. Like John said, I'm Stuart Randall. I'm the manager on the engagement. In addition to the big spiral-bound packet, there should have also been a smaller stapled packet associated with it too. The big packet's the financial statements. The smaller packet is the governance communication. The governance communication kind of includes some required communications we as your auditor needs to communicate to you as governance. I'm actually going to take a step back and just bring to attention that if you looked at last year's financial statements and compare it to this year's financial statements, you will see that there are some changes. That was an intentional change. Last year, as part of the renewal of the audit contract, the city did contract with us to prepare the financial statements, and we were able to do that. I think the process went well. I think Marianne expressed appreciation that we were able to take that off her load as she is dealing with a financial statement or financial software conversion. So if you have any questions about any changes or the financial statements, we'll dive into those in a little bit, but I just wanted to get that pointed out first. So going into the smaller packet, the governance communication. Like I said, this is the required communication that we have to do to you. I'll pull out some highlights, but I won't read it for verbatim, just because it gets a bit dry and technical at times. So starting out, we talk about what exactly we did. We audited the financial statements of the governmental activities, the business type activities, the discretely presented component unit, each major fund, and the aggregate remaining fund information. What does that mean? That means that we looked at the financial data associated with the city, divided into those different categories, and we came up with our opinion, which our opinion was an unmodified opinion, which is the best type of opinion you have. That is a good thing. It means that the financial statements reflect the financial position of the city as of December 31st, 2021, and for the year then ended. It goes on to talk about the accounting policies of the city, that there were no significant changes. It talks a little bit about accounting estimates. As much as people think that accounting is black and white, it's actually various shades of gray, and there are significant estimates associated with preparing the financial statements. Items such as depreciation, pension, your self-insurance, compensated absences, allowances, and that section of the letter just kind of gives a little bit more details about all of that stuff. Continuing on to page 2, and I should have started with this too, please interrupt me with any questions that you may have. We're here to help and explain and do whatever we can do to help you. Going to the bottom of the second page, difficulties encountered in performing the audit. It's always a good thing to say There were no difficulties, which we can say here. Uncorrected misstatements, corrected misstatements. There weren't any disagreements with management. We didn't have any disagreements. That is always a good thing. Going on to the next pages, significant issues discussed with management prior to engagement. There really wasn't anything significant. And also just a paragraph about the supplementary information. Just saying that there is information that is not necessarily required to be part of the financial statements, but is in here. And then we looked at it and made sure it at least matches the main financial statements. Like I said, I was going to go through it fast. That is fast. Any questions on the governance communication? Going into the bigger packet, I just want to pull out a couple of high-level financial numbers. I assume you guys have been looking at this very in-depth recently because it is budget season. But sometimes it's just nice to, hear a few things or get a few things underlined. If you turn to page 19 of the financial statements, this is your governmental fund balance sheet. This takes a look at each of your major governmental funds, so your general fund, your debt service, one-year TIDs, and then it summarizes all your other governmental funds together as of December 31st, 2021. This is essentially a snapshot of where everything was. And looking at your general fund, you had total fund balance of about $15.6 million, of which $11.3 million is available for spending on unassigned fund balance. So that essentially represents your reserves in your general fund. That number can be compared against your general fund expenses on page 21 of about $34.8 million, $35 million. That ratio of expenses is about a third. A third of your annual expenses is in your reserves as unassigned fund balance. That's a healthy reserve. You always want to have some reserves because you never know what's going to happen. You might have, some type of emergency situation where you need to expend money for whatever reason as a government. So having a reserve is healthy. Going over to the total column a little bit, or I should say the TID 3 and the other governmental funds, you'll see that there are some deficit unassigned fund balances. That's taking a look at most of those is associated with your TIFs. That's just a timing difference with your TIFs. With your TIFs, you prepay a lot of your capital assets and capital expenditures, and then you recover those costs over time. So it's not uncommon to have deficit fund balance in those funds. However, it is right now a limitation on the availability of the overall resources of the government until those revenues are recovered over the remaining lives of the TIFs. There is more detail on what makes up the other governmental funds further back in the book. You have to go back to page 90, 95, somewhere in that range. But if you want to see more detail on what makes up all of your governmental funds, that's farther back in the books. Any questions so far? Okay. And then the other thing I just want to take a look back on is your proprietary funds, specifically your water and wastewater. Obviously, those funds are a bit in flux right now because over the last 2 years, you've had some rate increases and you're building a massive upgrade to both of those facilities, or not even an upgrade, a new facility. But as those facilities go online over the next couple of months, you'll need to continue to monitor the financial performance of these funds. So looking at page 25, you can see that overall, for your water utility, your change in net position for the year was about a $930,000 increase, and your wastewater utility was a $1.8 million increase. As the debt on that starts coming due, you'll start incurring more and more interest expense, but also the depreciation on the new facilities will increase that expense. So you'll need to continue to monitor that your rates are appropriate and that you're still generating enough of a return on those return on your investments to ensure that those assets can stay in operating condition. One thing that the PSC is going to be looking at, the PSC, which regulates your water utility, is your rates of return. The last 2 years, it's been about 5%, 6%, and that's based on regulatory numbers. So that 5 or 6% is about what we've been seeing at other municipalities recently, but it's just something to continue to monitor as there's changes come online over the next couple of months. So that was kind of my look back at the previous year. Looking forward, there's just a couple of things we want to discuss because things in accounting never stay the same. One of the big things that everyone is dealing with right now is obviously grants and your ARPA funds. First off, just a general reminder that your ARPA funds, as the rules stand right now, you need to have those funds committed, obligated by the end of 2024 and spent by 2026. So, continue to work on a plan. You don't want to have to end up returning any of those funds. But overall, I would say over the last 4 or 5 years, we have seen an overall increase in emphasis on compliance and controls, both from the state government and federal government. They've become much more stringent on making sure the I's are dotted, the T's are dotted. And this is pretty much across the board, a lot more follow-up on whenever there's issues. Now, one of the difficulties with governments is there's usually a lot of silos associated with cities and counties. You have your community development, you have transit, water, sewer, police, and they all kind of operate. Some of the administrative duties are siloed in those things. And it can be difficult with some of these grant administrative requirements if all of a sudden, and I'm not going to pick on them for any specific reason, the police department gets a grant, because police departments get a lot of small little grants from both the state and federal government, whether to help fund patrol routes, help purchase equipment, but there's usually various reporting and compliance requirements associated with these grants. And sometimes, just because of the siloed nature of everything, some of those requirements get missed. This finance department has to prepare a report at year end that details out all of these grants, and it's not uncommon for some of these to not be reported quite correctly. So it's useful that there should be a centralized, essentially, location or positions responsible for administering grants and making sure that the compliance and internal controls associated with these grants are monitored and complied with. That was essentially what I had to say about grants. Did you have anything else to add or about leases?
Yeah. Thank you, Stuart. Just kind of in closing, just to piggyback on that, the biggest thing we're seeing with those grants is, you've had grants forever at the city, and you've had a great history of internal control in that. But what we're seeing is a lot of clients are getting new grants. They're getting ARPA grants that you've never got before. The rules are different. There's even some smaller grants that are completely new, and they're higher risk because of that, because you are not familiar with the rules, and neither is anyone else using them, departments and things like that. So it's highly advantageous to be just super aware of all the grant requirements. And you are. Obviously, we communicate with you on things we know. But even going down the road next year and the year after, it's going to be the same, because there's going to be more federal money coming. So again, great topic to kind of talk about as far as a reminder. The thing I want to conclude on is really the lease standard in GASB 87, and that's going to be effective for 2022 reporting year. So obviously, we're getting to the end of 2022. And again, we've had discussions. This isn't the first time, obviously, Mary Ann's hearing this. But just from an overall standpoint of how that's going to affect the financial statements and annual financial report next year is, again, the technical part of the lease is they're changing the rules. They're consolidating the rules. They're making it a little bit simpler where there's only one rule now, but part of that simplicity is going to make it more complicated, because GASB tends to think things through and make reporting to try to be transparent, and they cover a lot of different rules. Well, there's new things coming down that currently don't exist today, and that with leases, and that is the receivable side. So when you lease to others, that is right now not applicable in lease standards. That will be now. So there is significant amount of work on that side of it. We didn't think so at first. So a year ago when I was standing here talking, I thought it was going to be a big deal, but not that big a deal, and it's turning into be a bigger deal. And it's taking clients and cities a lot of work to gather this stuff. And the hard work becomes once you gather all those agreements, those multi-year agreements you have, both when you pay money out for equipment and things like that, a normal lease, quote unquote, what you would consider today, and then also these cell phone tower leases, all kinds of different stuff, land leases, parking lot leases. There's all kinds of multi-year agreements that exist in the city through all the departments that could technically be in GASB 87 lease standard. So it's taking considerable time, municipal staff's time, to gather this stuff. So start early. You have a little bit of time here, but we have been talking. We can certainly assist you if needed. But even so, even that assistance is going to be You got to gather that stuff, and it takes a long time. So that's the heavy lift is gathering all the documents. So again, you've already started that process, but I just want to keep that, front and center that it is, it's going to take some time getting through all that stuff. And we have actually reached out, even in clients that have hired us to do it, we'd have to reach out to the attorneys because we can't figure out some of those agreements. So all depends on what you have and what you have in your agreements. But GASB 87 is fairly technical in terms of narrowing down into those agreements and different factors. So I won't get into the technical part of that, but there's a lot to it. So just wanted to give that as a public service announcement. So.
Go ahead, Marion.
Sure, I just wanted to add a couple of things to note. So, as Stuart said, the financial statements are getting more complex, accounting rules are changing, and there are estimates in our reports. One of the changes, it's not that recent, but we are required to adjust our investments to market each year. So, you purchase a bond when interest rates, let's say, are 1%, and you think this is a great investment, and then interest rates drop to 0.5%. All of a sudden, it becomes a better investment, right? Because you're now earning more than someone could purchase that in the open market. So our regulations say we have to show that bond at what it would, what you could sell it for. So let's say you could now sell it for $1.1 million. So you have to increase your asset. So that means you have to record a revenue, and you record that revenue as interest income. So you now are showing more interest income than you're actually going to earn, because you're only going to earn that 1% on your $1 million. So that, what it does is it pushes your income from one year to the next. Because if you, let's say, have that bond for 3 years, you're going to earn that $10,000 every year. But it's having you move income into the year where it is worth more. But we, as investors, do not buy and sell our investments. We buy and hold. And even if you sold your investment when it was worth more money, well, then you would have the cash, but you'd have to go and turn around and invest it. And your, bonds would cost more than they did when you bought it when interest rates were low. Conversely, if you bought that same bond at 1% and now you could get 3%, instead of it being worth $1.1 million, it's now worth $800,000, because another person on the market is going to be like, well, I don't want a bond for 1%, I want 3%. So you're going to have to pay them for your bond, basically, and take a discount on it. So that is, and historically, since we've been adjusting our investments to market, we've had 2 instances where we actually have negative investment income. So if you look on page 93 of our general fund, you can see that we budgeted $400,000 in investment income, but we really have negative $60,000. Well, that doesn't mean that we actually lost money on our investments or that we didn't collect our interest on that $1 million bond, and that's just, an example, obviously. But it does push your income into different years. Now, why would someone have us do that? It was, things are always knee-jerk reactions oftentimes, right? And so, there was a lot of junk bonds that governments, unfortunately, were purchasing out in California. And they had these large assets on their books, and they were worthless. And so, in a measure to be transparent, they said we need to adjust them to market because they are going to be worthless. Now, our investments are not worthless. It's just that when we purchased the bonds, as I said, using an example, our interest rates were 1%. They are now, because of inflation and, interest rates going up, you can buy something for a better price. As our investments mature, they move closer to market, because as you come closer to your maturity date, then it becomes its par value again. And so I just wanted to point this out. It's not the first time we've had a negative interest income. And if you look at the monthly financial statements, you can see that that negative is continuing to grow because the interest rate investments are worth more than they were at December 31st. Obviously, we all know the Fed's been increasing interest rates. So again, I just wanted to point this out. I can't remember exactly what year it was. It must have been around '08, right? Like the last crash.
Last recession.
Yeah. So that was one thing. The other thing, as far as grants are concerned, I will be bringing to the Finance Committee a procedure or a policy that I think the Finance Committee should consider, and that would be to require all grant approvals to come before committee and council for approval, because it is a way to ensure that we do have good controls over our grants, that they get reported on our annual schedule of state and federal assistance, that we understand what the local share is. And for example, I know, like my department was guilty of accepting the grant during the election. That became kind of a contentious issue. And so it really becomes more transparent, being that we're government. And so that is a policy I'm going to bring, after talking to the auditors and looking to increase our internal controls, because internal controls on grants is very important. And, especially now, because so much of the money that's coming through is ARPA-related money, procurement, and following some of those rules are really important.
Excellent.
Any other questions for us as far as the audit itself or the audit process itself? I'd certainly take them.
I've got
Go
a
ahead,
question.
Doug.
Okay, so you're listing under water, wastewater, we had obviously two large projects going on in 21 for 23 mil and about 49 million. Does that represent the bulk of what is spent, or is more coming into 22? And I don't know whose question that is.
I can speak that at least through the end of August, which is when these financials were issued, the city had borrowed additional $13 million associated with wastewater and $3 million associated with the water treatment plant. So those outlays offsetting that debt would have at least been incurred through August 1st of 2022.
But these financial statements go through
December 31.
December 31, 21.
Okay, so when those are on drawdown schedules, it's whatever they've drawn down as of that date towards the project to pay it as they go?
Essentially.
Okay.
Yeah, and it does, the footnote on page 58 does disclose, I think, that what the total amount of the bonds,
57,
yep. Thank
page
you.
57.
Yes.
So
Perfect.
as of 12/31/21, the last year's year end, you had borrowed 66 million on the sewer, 32 million on the water safe drinking fund loan, and then through August 1st, you had borrowed additional 13 million and 3 million.
Yep.
August 1st, 2022.
Right. Anything that happens after January 1st, 22, up until the point we issue, so in this case it was August 1st, is in the footnotes. Any major things are in the footnotes, but they're not reflected, any activity there is not reflected in the actual financial statements
Right.
themselves.
Okay.
They'll be reflected in next year's.
Does anybody have additional questions on the audit statements? If not, we'll place those reports on file. We don't need to take action on those. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
For that presentation. Item number 4 is discussion and possible action on the 2023 Business Improvement District Operating Plan. You've got a copy of that in the packets. Every year, the Business Improvement District drafts a plan whereby they agree to charge themselves for certain things, right? So, that's the plan that we have here. And Does anyone have questions at all on that bid district operating plan? It is really, it's delineated on a map that's provided in the packets, and those participating members in that district really set this budget for themselves.
Correct.
It's paid with their money, so. Is there a motion to approve and accept their operating plan? Motion by Denny, is there a second? Second by Watson. Further discussion or questions? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None are opposed, that motion carries. Item 5 is discussion and possible action regarding a resolution hiring booth management consulting for ARPA contract and related budget modification. And you'll recall last month, we had held on this. We were actually hoping for an alternative fund source to pay it with. This would be us engaging the services of a professional firm to manage the subrecipients of ARPA grants, to make sure that they and we are in compliance with the requirements. We had asked for an alternative funding source, and it looks like Mary Ann has located one from reserves. That way, the ARPA fund could be reserved for public-facing projects that the public benefits directly from versus overhead. Does anyone have any questions for her on that at all? Go ahead, Doug, if you have.
Sure. Dumb question, I guess. It just seems odd that we're borrowing money to, or spending money to spend money, right? So we have that many, there's that much red tape with this ARPA. All right.
If the subrecipients aren't in compliance, we have a major problem,
Yeah,
so.
we just today, so as the auditors pointed out, they were concluding their audit for 2021, and they just pointed out to us that there will be a finding that they submit to the federal government because we were supposed to be reporting all of our subrecipients over 30,000 to federal clearinghouse, and all of our subrecipients today, the subrecipient activity takes place in community development. When you think of the community development block grant, and each year the advisory group
Citizen
goes
advisory
through,
panel?
yes, and they decide they're going to give money to Helping Hands or Adaptive, whatever. I don't know the names of these nonprofits, but we were supposed to be reporting that annually, and that was not taking place. So there is another example of compliance that we were missing. And as the auditors pointed out, compliance and regulations are growing, and we have been stumbling in keeping up with managing that. And I think, given the volume of, and the magnitude of the ARPA funds, it is an investment well worth it, and it's going to help us manage our other grants better too. Obviously, block grant has been going on for years. That responsibility to report that started in 2010, so we have 11 years of non-compliance.
Okay, so I would say it's for this amount, if it's 10,000, that's a good deal. Is that going to cover it, or is there going to be a lot more work?
Well,
that they
that's
have?
my estimate, so it's an hourly charge. And we, when we put the landmark agreement together, we paid Quarles. This is substantially less per hour than the Quarles and Brady billing. So we always, we almost always hire outside legal to work on those development agreements, on our subrecipient agreement. And so, it's just a matter of hiring someone who has perhaps more specialty in the area and
Okay.
a better
So
hourly
this
rate.
10,000 is for 22, and then we'll need to account for it again in 23.
I wouldn't say that, because, once we get a boilerplate on our subrecipient agreements, we might be able to do those in-house.
Okay.
But, like I said, when we looked at the landmark agreement, we don't have anything in there about when the money has to be spent by. There's no reporting or performance measures. I mean, I know I was involved in it, and it's not our best work. So I think that we could use some tutoring on this, and we should hire somebody who has a lot of expertise in the area.
Okay. Carol?
Just a quick comment that just from grants I've worked with, and like, it's like this compared to that scale. I can understand that, although we always want to try to save money, that I do think it's a good investment, because with the different regulations, I just think it's also peace of mind just to make sure we've got everything accounted for.
Well, and especially with subrecipients, I think it's easier to account for the use of grant funding that we use ourselves. But when you farm it out to others and you don't control their operations and their offices and just to make sure that all of those down the tree are doing it the way they've proposed, I think that's important for us too. So, do we have a motion? Go ahead, Sarah.
And I guess to echo what the gentleman said earlier, like, we have silos, and if you look at some of the things that we've approved, it's in like park and rec, or if it's in, streets and maintenance. So like
Right.
having somebody consistently looking at these, and then, like you said, maybe could create a template that we can use forward, going forward. Just an expert that understands the regulations a little bit more. So yeah, I would move to approve.
Okay, so we have a motion from Watson, a second from Lukens. Further discussion? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None are opposed, so that item is approved as well. Item number 6 is discussion and possible action approving a budget modification for completing supplemental site investigation work and a remedial action operations report, RAOR, for 1300 Cleveland Avenue. You'll see in the packets, there's a staff memo in there indicating that the DNR has requested some additional research to classify some groundwater issues. There's an important correction to be made on that information. In that information erroneously was included the terminology industrial standard. That should have been non-industrial standard. We agreed and we promised the neighborhood that we would endeavor to clean that up to a residential standard, which is certainly non-industrial. So it's important that we be clear that that's what we're still working with. But that said, I think this will enable us to further our process with getting things cleaned up there, and we would be transferring funds out of the environmental fund to cover this. Ms. Carol?
So one question on that, since this all started before I was on council, but it is zoned residential, correct?
It is now. The council changed the zoning.
That's what I thought,
Correct.
in just looking back in the research. So my only question is non-industrial the same as residential? I
Yes.
mean, I get it is, but is there,
No, it is.
does there need to
It is.
be?
Industrial is a lesser standard overall, and so by going to the residential, it's a heightened level of cleanup.
So that's, I guess, what I'm asking. Residential and non-industrial are exactly the same, like, as far as terminology they
Bring up the
use?
Public Works Director who's involved with the
thank you.
project. Welcome.
Yeah, it's a good question, Carol. So there's really two classifications. It's either industrial, which is typical industries, or non-industrial, which is everything else, commercial, residential, and so that encompasses all other types of uses. Yeah.
Thank you. I
Sure.
come from way back, a legal background, and so terminology,
Yeah.
and also in what I do now, so thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay. Alder Killian, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and this is in District 3. I think Alder Lukens does bring up a very good question on certain distinctions, though, and distinctions that I believe will be important for the RAOR. So, well, tonight, this item has two components, the supplemental testing for the PFAS in the groundwater. I fully support that. I will request that the ROAR funding not be approved at this time. I will explain why it would be premature and not in the city's best financial interest. So often with an RAOR, it would be better to have a clear idea of exactly how that land will be used in terms of specific development, design, and so forth. So we know from an enormous amount of public feedback that those in the neighborhood and the majority of the city do not want this back to industrial. What we do not know, with any degree of detail is, we know the public doesn't want that. So what would the public like that is positive reuse? And at CISM committee, I had suggested I would hold a public input meeting as the older person to garner those types of details from the public. What would you, what are a set of options or possibilities there that we could start looking at? Now, maybe since this is happening now and I didn't know this was going to happen, we could do it more collectively as a city or various committees. And would you permit me a little more than 3 minutes?
Sure. Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So really, that would be logically and appropriately the way to do that. You would not want to pull the trigger on the RAOR now because in 2 or 3 months, I mean, we may have more granular detail on what we want to do with that non-industrial land use there. So I would also note, and if I may, I'll pass 2 things out here. Please bear with me. I'll pass them this way. Thank you. So there are 2 important things, and we just talked about grants and compliance. That's a good segue. So in this census block group, what you see, and it's in the EPA report, there is a linguistic isolation rate of 16%. And you also see in the adjacent census block group that's just right by Riverside Park, 22%. Now, those are the highest linguistic isolation rates in the entire city, and I would request that the body would respect that when we have this type of meeting, we need to have language support baked in. And we already had a family with some language obstacles in regard to this site and concern, so I'd ask that public input session that we hold next month also provide language translation or interpretation services where needed. But I think this gives us a great opportunity to do something really positive and to put the cherry on top of a very encouraging situation. Is I had called the EPA this morning to check with their new round of brownfield grants. There's an enormous amount of money, and actually it's supposed to be used in areas just like this, which are formally designated EJ communities. So when I talked to the point person there, she asked for some information on this site. I sent her some preliminary information from the DNR database, and she said she will look at that and also probably send some questions to see if this site would be eligible. And my understanding is it could be up to $500,000 on the table for remediation. So, and that's just for starters. I think we should also look at DNR reuse loans and grants as well. But in conclusion, I think we need to get to the RAOR, but now really would not be the time. We need public input. Otherwise, we're putting the cart before the horse. And lastly, just because I thought the committee may have a concern about timing, do we have to statutorily get that RAOR in at a certain time? I also called the DNR and I talked with Mr. Thompson, and he wrote something in an email that if we would like to request an extension from the department citing the cause for the delay and expected date of submittal, apparently that would be all right. If my understanding is correct, you'd have to ask Mr. Thompson. But all in all, it doesn't look like there'd be any obstacles whatsoever to doing what may be real positive for the community. In fact, we may save quite a bit of money doing just that. So thank you.
Okay. So it looked like the request was for $26,000, I think, just to get the process started. That said, we certainly have those funds in the environmental fund. If the only 2 choices we have are either residential or not, and knowing that we, in a lot of our discussion surrounding the site, a number of us indicated that regardless of what the parcel becomes, we wanted to see the residential cleanup standard adhered to because it was the highest possible standard. So whether it ever has houses on it or not, that was the standard that we all seemed to want last year about this time. So, that said, it is a fairly small amount of money to keep that water testing moving forward, although if there's not a an issue with the timeline, and assuming that this question and answer with the EPA could happen fairly quickly, we certainly could delay action on this until we know more. I guess, Sarah?
Well, can we like separate them out, like continue with the supplemental investigation, but just not do the RAOR right now? Like, and how much would that change the costs?
I don't know what the breakdown of the cost is, but if that's what you wanted to do, so my understanding from the council was they wanted to move this forward, right? And there wasn't a use for it. So there's two things that'll dictate what the costs are for the remediation. One is obviously the zoning, and two will be the actual use. And so there's a couple different paths. If you take the path right now without a use, clean it up to non-residential or non-industrial standards, which would include removal of soils, capping part of it, and then there would be a cap management plan. Kind of like what happened with the mall site, right? Clean it up, there's a cap management plan. And then if anything ever comes in to be developed there, then there would have to be an amendment to that cap management plan on how those soils and everything underneath then would be managed, depending on what that development is.
And is that a difficult process?
No, it's
Okay.
not. I mean, we can, I had also talked with Matt Thompson. He said that upon request, from an entity, if we have other things in the works or other processes, we can ask for an extension, even after the site investigation work is done and the DNR feels like we have a good handle on what's there. And so I don't think that will be an issue. It delays everything, as far as moving forward. But if that's how the council would like to proceed, I just
Do we
need to know that.
expect that delay is to be a month or two, right? Not months and months? I mean, based on the feedback you got today, Tom, it's not 6 months, it's maybe a couple months, is that?
Well, the individual did not say, I mean, I can forward, if I get a response, I can forward it to this committee and the body. I'm not sure what it says the deadline on there, I don't have one in front of me, is perhaps November. Does someone have that EPA grant paper in front of them?
November 22.
Yes, so that's the application deadline, and yes, again, I mean, especially with all of the considerations in the neighborhood and past history, and it's not pointing fingers certainly, but there's been too many errors, and we need to have the meaningful public engagement and have this be citizen-driven. So, perhaps committees or staff can interface with districts or committees to, we can try to have a public engagement meeting next month, but that application deadline is in November.
Well, I guess that's my concern, because if there's grant money available and the window is closing, that application process, or at least the preparation of a grant application, needs to start now. And if that means we need to hold off on the REOR, then, I mean, if there's no harm in that, we certainly can hold off on it for a bit. But if it's a matter of the same outcome on the grant end, whether or not we complete, if we move forward on the groundwater testing with the assumption that we want a non-industrial outcome, are we harming our chances for grants for other things? Because the cleanup is really going to be the expensive part, either the removal of soil and the disposal of soil. So us finding out what lurks beyond that, to me, seems like a step that would not hurt the progress of any of this. Is that?
I support the first part, the PFAS groundwater testing 100%. So if that could be broken out, I would have no concerns.
Okay. Doug?
Okay, yeah, I guess the chicken or the egg analogy here is, we're talking a little bit about in task 5, without consideration for a specific development plan, but then in task 6, we have a proposed site redevelopment plans that they'll hold the meetings with, the COTW and meetings on 8. So maybe we just go tasks through 1 through 4, if it isn't a significant delay on the rest of the tasks.
Which that
We
gets
need to
us.
put a pin in the calendar to make sure we make it
Right.
happen.
I mean, if we're intending to apply for a grant and we have approximately, just under 2 months, that needs to come together quick. So, I mean, is that something, Eric, that your department can work on to meet that deadline for that, to try to apply for some EPA money?
Yeah, Tom, I don't know who you spoke with, but if you have that contact, you could forward it to me. That would be helpful.
Yes, her name is Miss Nadler, and
Okay.
could I also have the courtesy of being kept in the loop as the older person?
Yeah.
Thank you.
It might not be a bad idea if the two of you kind of work together on it a little bit, just because. Sarah?
I guess I just was concerned, I was trying to look at like what the guidelines are for, qualifying for grants. And I mean, if an RAOR is required, wouldn't it be nice, I mean, I don't know if it would be part of it, or is it just the site investigation?
Go ahead.
Well, and I'm not an expert on the subject matter, but when I spoke to this individual, because they have different grants, one of them is an assessment grant, et cetera, I explained that we had already almost defined fully the extent of the contamination on the site other than the supplemental testing, and she did indicate to me that given we were at that point, it may be a cleanup grant then that we would want to look into.
Okay, so then, go ahead, Doug.
So if it is amendment in order here?
You can, we haven't taken a motion yet, so if you wanted to take a motion to approve moving forward with tasks 1 through 4,
I would
which
move
gets
that
you the
we,
PFAS stuff?
we take task 1 through 4, addressing PFAS sampling, and delay 5 through 8.
Okay, and then would your motion also include a directive to staff to pursue the grant opportunity as revealed here today?
Yes, I would like
okay.
to include that.
All right, and is there a second to Doug's motion? Second by Watson. Further discussion or questions? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None are opposed. That item carries. So we'll at least get half of that list taken care of.
And it's on council tonight.
And it is on council tonight. So we'll amend the item for council tonight to note that only the first 4 items would be moving forward at this point, until we
Thanks.
know a little bit more. Thank you. Okay, so item number 7 is discussion and possible action regarding sole source purchase with Flock Safety for police automated license plate readers and related technology for a 1-year contract with future renewals expected. And you'll recall that we originally had ranked this item for ARPA. We had also ranked it for CIP, or the CIP committee ranked it. In between that process taking flight, the police department was awarded a grant from the state, which is allowing them to purchase these items without earmarking CIP funding or spending ARPA on them. So this actually is just your documentation that they buy them from the one place that provides them. Does anyone have any questions for Deputy Chief Barnes on this at all? Because they would be buying it with the grant that we gave them approval to accept last time, I believe. Is there a motion to approve? Go ahead, Doug. Is that a motion?
won't move that we
Motion
approve.
by Denny. Is there a second? Second by Lukens. Further discussion? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None are opposed. That motion carries as well. Item number 8 is discussion and possible action regarding accepting the FEMA Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response, or abbreviated as SAFER, grant for the hiring of 9 firefighters for the 3-year period for a total grant funding of $3,164,763. This is the best news that we've received in this committee in months. The grant that the fire chief was so hoping to get, he's been awarded. And so that will help us pay for 3 years their staffing up to full force. So we had been so hopeful, and last week he was informed that we will be getting that money. So we need to approve the receipt so he can accept. Motion by Watson, second by Denny. Further discussion? Go ahead, Carol.
Just one quick, congratulations. That's all I wanted to say.
It's huge.
And thank you.
It's huge, and it's a lot of work went into that, so thank you for that, Chief. So with that, with a motion and a second on the floor to accept the grant, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None are opposed. That item carries. We are pushing up to the start of the council meeting, and we're going to have time to, for the clerks to register public commenters. We expect a volume of that tonight. So with that, we will hold item number 9, which is the general fund financial reports, for our next meeting. And then item number 10 is just a communication regarding our budget workshops for the 2023 budget. At our next meeting, October 11th, we're planning at least the general presentation where Marianne will offer a PowerPoint about the budget and the budget process. Then we're planning 2 special sessions, which are the actual workshops where we dig into the meat of the budget. That is the 19th and 20th of October. We expect those will happen at 5:15. And then if we need one more meeting to fine tune all of that, and if we're waiting on numbers, say from the state or enrollment numbers from HR for benefit plans and things, we would do that final work at our normal meeting on October 25th, if that calendar works for you guys. Sarah?
Just a quick question. The 11th would still start at 5:30? And
Yes.
that'll be enough time for a
Yep.
presentation?
Yep.
Okay.
So, so that's kind of where we'd be at. So we'll be seeing each other a lot in October. That then allows the public hearing on the budget to take place at the first meeting of November. So with that, I will take a motion to adjourn, and we'll reset for council. Motion by Watson. Is there a second by Lukens? Members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No one ever is. We'll stand adjourned. We'll take 5 minutes to adjust here for the next meeting. And residents that are entering for tonight's council meeting, if you're interested in making public comment at the beginning of the meeting, you'll need to come up, sign up here on one of these forms. The mayor will call you all in order. And so while we're doing that reset, it's important that we get you guys logged in. You bet. Again, anybody here for public comment at the council meeting on any item on the agenda, you'll need to complete these forms and leave them up here with the clerk.